I put the tracker on a Wednesday. Magnetic case, smaller than a thumb drive. Pressed up beneath the rear passenger wheel well of my wife's car while she was in the shower. The whole thing took less than a minute. I stood up in the garage, brushed the dust off my knees, and told myself I was doing the right thing. I told myself any reasonable man would do the same after 8 weeks of the same lie told the same way with the same unbothered smile. My name is Jordan Cole. 32 years old. Co-founder of a mid-size residential renovation company in Nashville, Tennessee. My wife and I had been married 6 years. Met in college, dated 4 years before that. A decade of the same person. The same laugh, the same way she'd steal the blanket without waking up, the same hand that reached for mine in movie theaters even after 1,000 movies. I knew her the way you know a place you've lived your whole life. Or at least, I thought I did. It started in September. She began going to her sister's place on Tuesday evenings. Said they were doing a cooking class together, something they'd signed up for downtown. Her sister lived 40 minutes south, which made a Tuesday night class a 2-hour round trip minimum. Fine. Normal. I had no reason to question it. Then Thursdays got added. Then, one Friday she didn't come home until after midnight. Said they'd had wine and she'd lost track of time. I asked if I could come along sometime. She said it was a sister thing. That I'd be bored, that I should let them have this. I let them have it for 8 weeks. 8 weeks before I noticed the mileage didn't add up. Her sister's neighborhood is 41 miles south of our house. A Tuesday round trip should put roughly 82 miles on the car. I'm not the kind of man who checks odometers. I didn't even realize I was doing it consciously until I found myself standing in the garage one Tuesday morning, phone out, noting the number before she left. When she came back that night, the car had 29 miles on it. 29 miles. You can't get to her sister's street and back in 29 miles from our driveway. You can barely get to the interstate and back. I didn't confront her. That was the hardest part of who I was becoming, learning to stay quiet when every instinct was screaming. I just smiled, asked how the class went, listened to her describe a pasta dish in perfect detail, and went to bed that night staring at the ceiling while the numbers ran circles in my head. I put the tracker on the car, 3 days later. The first Tuesday it was active. I watched the dot move from our driveway northeast into downtown Nashville. Not south. Not 41 miles in any direction that led to her sister. It stopped on a street called Meridian Avenue, 8 miles from our house, and sat there from 7:14 p.m. until 10:52 p.m. I looked up the address on a real estate site. A converted loft building. 12 units. No businesses, no studios, no class of any kind. I drove past it once that Thursday at 8 p.m. Her car was in the lot. A silver Audi I recognized was parked 2 spaces down. I drove home and sat in our driveway for a while before I went inside. The silver Audi belonged to my business partner. I'd known him for 11 years. We'd built our company from a 2-man renovation crew into a 17-person firm with active contracts across 4 counties. He'd stood beside me at my wedding. He was godfather to my sister's daughter. There was a photo of the two of us at the company's 5-year anniversary dinner hanging on the wall of our main office, both of us grinning like we just won something, because we had. 5 years of work that almost didn't survive the first winter, that almost broke both of us, that we dragged into daylight through nothing but stubbornness and mutual trust. His Audi. Parked 2 spaces from my wife's car. Outside a loft building neither of them had ever mentioned to me. I went to work the next morning like nothing had happened. I sat across from him in our Friday operations meeting and listened to him walk through the Q4 project schedule and asked 2 follow-up questions and nodded at the right moments and thought about how 11 years can apparently mean nothing at all. I didn't confront either of them. I needed to understand the full shape of it first. Because something had been sitting wrong in my stomach since I'd seen that Audi, something beyond the obvious betrayal, something I couldn't name yet. The way a structure feels unstable before you can see the crack. That weekend, I started going through the company financials quietly. We had a shared LLC, equal partnership, joint operational accounts. Standard for the kind of company we'd built. I trusted him with everything because that was what partners did. What I found when I actually looked, not the trusting glance I'd been giving quarterly summaries for years, took me 2 hours to fully process. Over the previous 5 months, a series of vendor payments had been routed through a secondary account I hadn't been copied on. The amounts were distributed in irregular, the kind of pattern that wouldn't trigger an audit flag but added up to something significant when you laid them end to end. I ran the numbers 3 times, just under $190,000. Gone through an account that had my business partner's name on it and a vendor identification number attached to a company I'd never heard of. I searched the company name. It had been registered in Delaware 8 months ago. The registered agent was listed as a law firm in Brentwood, Tennessee. I knew that law firm. My father-in-law was a senior partner there. I sat very still at my desk for a long time. My father-in-law and I had never been close. He was a man who expressed his opinion of you through what he didn't say, through the small pauses before he answered questions, through the way he looked at my hands at dinner the first time I met him, like he was calculating something. He'd wanted his daughter to marry a particular kind of man, and I wasn't it. Not the right school, not the right background, not the right kind of ambition, which in his estimation meant the wrong kind, the kind that built things with its hands instead of moving money around. He'd been polite to me for 6 years. Never warm. Polite. And now his firm's name was attached to a vendor account that had been quietly draining my business. I called my brother that night from a gas station parking lot 3 miles from the house. He picked up on the second ring. I told him everything without stopping: the mileage, the tracker, the loft on Meridian, the Audi, the $190,000, the Delaware LLC, the Brentwood law firm. He was quiet for a long time on the other end. Then he said, "Jordan, does your wife have access to the operational accounts?" I closed my eyes. She'd been added to the company's primary account 2 years ago. My business partner had suggested it at the time, said it was smart to have a secondary authorized party in case something happened to either of us, standard continuity planning. I'd agreed without hesitation because it was practical and because I trusted both of them. She had view access and transfer authorization on a $340,000 working capital account. "She has access," I said. My brother exhaled slowly. "Jordan, you need to call a lawyer before you do anything else." Tonight, I called an attorney that night. Not a friend, not a referral through anyone in my circle. I found him through the Tennessee Bar Association's directory, someone with no connection to anyone I knew. His name was Garrett Finch. 12 years in civil litigation, specialized in business fraud and asset protection. I reached his emergency line and left a message at 11:15 p.m. He called back at 11:47. I told him what I had. He asked 12 very precise questions and then told me not to move any money, not to confront anyone, not to change my behavior in any observable way, and to come to his office first thing Monday morning with every document I could access without triggering any account alerts. I spent Saturday and Sunday being the same man I'd always been. I made coffee. I asked about her week. I watched football with the sound low on Sunday afternoon while she sat beside me reading. And I thought about how you can know someone for a decade and still be looking at a stranger. Monday morning, I sat in Garrett's office for 2 hours. I spread everything I had on his conference table: the account statements, the vendor payment records, the LLC registration documents, the tracker data, the Meridian Avenue address, a photograph I'd taken of the 2 cars in the parking lot. Garrett looked at everything carefully and methodically, asked 4 more questions, and then sat back in his chair. "What they're building," he said, "is a divorce first, drain second structure. Your wife files, the company assets are considered marital property in a contested dissolution. Your business partner uses the confusion of litigation to finalize the account transfers, and your father-in-law's firm handles the documentation on both ends." He paused. "The vendor account is the first stage. The working capital account is the second. If she files before you discover the transfers, a temporary court order freezes all assets in place, including the ones that have already moved. By the time the dust settles, the money is in accounts you don't have access to, and the paper trail is buried in a Delaware LLC with no obvious connection to any of them." "How long?" I asked. He looked at the tracker data. "Based on the timeline you've given me, the account opening 8 months ago, the vendor payments starting 5 months ago, I'd estimate they've been building this for at least 6 to 8 months. This isn't a recent decision. Someone planned this from a starting point." He looked at me. "The question is whether the starting point was your business partner or your father-in-law." "My father-in-law," I said. It was the only answer that made sense. My business partner was talented and he was ambitious, but he wasn't the kind of man who thought in legal structures and document trails. He'd needed someone to architect this. Someone who knew business dissolution law and asset protection strategies and exactly how to route money through a shell company without leaving a signature. My father-in-law had been doing exactly that for corporate clients for 30 years. He just hadn't done it to his own son-in-law before. Garrett filed an emergency motion to freeze the company's operational accounts that afternoon. We moved faster than they expected. The working capital account had already had a $60,000 transfer request submitted that morning, same IP pattern as the earlier vendor payments, flagged automatically because Garrett had contacted the bank before the business day ended. The request was blocked. $60,000 stayed exactly where it was. I kept going to work. Kept sitting across from my business partner in meetings. Kept answering his texts. It was the strangest performance I've ever given, acting like a man who trusts completely while carrying the full weight of the opposite. The one moment I almost broke was a Thursday afternoon when he clapped me on the shoulder in the parking lot and said we should grab dinner soon. It had been too long. I looked him in the eye and said that sounded great and meant none of it. The Thursday after the accounts were frozen, I watched the tracker again. She left at 7:22 p.m. and was parked on Meridian Avenue by 7:41. I drove downtown and found a spot on the street with a sightline to the building entrance. I wasn't going inside. Garrett had been clear: no direct confrontation, no independent evidence collection, nothing that could compromise the case his investigators were building. I just needed to see it once with my own eyes. Not on a screen. Not a blue dot on a map. She walked out at 9:15 with my business partner beside her. They stood in the parking lot and talked for a few minutes. He put his hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him the way you look at someone when you feel safe with them. Then she got in her car and left. I drove home the long way. Sat in our garage for 20 minutes with the engine off before I went inside. What I hadn't expected was the conversation I had with her brother the following weekend. He'd called asking if I wanted to watch the game, same thing we did every couple of months. I said yes. We sat in a bar on Broadway and watched the first half, and then partway through the second half he put his beer down and didn't pick it back up. "Jordan," he said, "I need to tell you something." He'd known for 4 months. Not the full extent of it. He hadn't known about the financial scheme, hadn't understood it was anything beyond an affair. But he'd seen them together at a restaurant downtown in August, just the two of them, and when he'd asked his sister about it, she'd told him the truth and then told him to stay out of it. He'd been carrying it since August. He looked at me across the table like a man who'd spent 4 months hating himself. "Why didn't you tell me?" I said. "Because she's my sister," he said. "And I thought if I waited it would end on its own." He shook his head. "That was wrong. I know that was wrong." I told him what was actually happening. Not the affair, the money. The LLC. His father's law firm. I watched his face move through disbelief and then something slower and harder. He hadn't known. I believed him. There's a particular expression that isn't possible to perform, the look of realizing that someone you love is capable of something you never imagined, and he was wearing it completely. He cooperated with Garrett's investigators voluntarily. He provided records of a conversation his father had with him 6 months earlier, in which his father had described my company's financial structure in specific detail. Detail he shouldn't have had unless someone had given it to him. His sister had given it to him. She'd passed our internal financial documents to her father, who'd used them to design the extraction structure. His brother-in-law's cooperation turned out to be one of the more valuable pieces of the case. The investigators finished their work on a Friday. The following Monday morning, the Nashville Financial Crimes Unit executed a search warrant on my business partner's home office and on my father-in-law's law firm simultaneously. My business partner's attorney advised him to cooperate. He did. The full account of the scheme came out in his statement over 2 days: how my father-in-law had approached him 14 months ago, how he'd been promised a buyout of the company at inflated valuation. Once the assets were extracted and I was removed from the picture through the divorce proceedings, how he'd understood clearly that the plan required my wife's active participation and that she had agreed to it. She'd agreed to it. That was the sentence I kept returning to for a long time afterward. Not she'd gone along with it. Not she'd been convinced. She had agreed to it. There was a distinction in those words that mattered to me, though I'd have been hard-pressed to explain exactly why. My father-in-law was disbarred and faced criminal charges for conspiracy to commit fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. His law firm terminated his partnership. My business partner pled guilty to wire fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. He received 18 months. The $190,000 in vendor payments was recovered in full through asset forfeiture proceedings. My wife and I were divorced by the following spring. Tennessee is an equitable distribution state, but equitable doesn't mean equal when one spouse has engaged in deliberate marital waste and fraud. She received significantly less than she'd anticipated. She was not charged criminally. Her cooperation with investigators in exchange for immunity meant she walked away from it legally, which was an outcome I didn't have the power to prevent and eventually made peace with. What she didn't walk away from was the marriage, the house, the life, or the decade. Though she gave away herself. My business partner's 18 months meant I needed to restructure the company immediately. I bought out his stake through the fraud recovery proceeds, something Garrett had anticipated and structured for in the civil proceedings. I brought in a new operations director named Deb, who'd been running a competitor firm for a decade and had been trying to get out of that situation for 2 years. She was better at the operational side than my business partner had ever been. The company finished the year at 22% above our previous revenue record. Her brother and I still have dinner occasionally. It's different than it was, quieter, but he's one of the few people from that chapter of my life I didn't lose. He told me once that the hardest part wasn't what his father had done, it was realizing his father had looked at his sister's husband for 6 years and seen nothing but an opportunity. I didn't have an answer for that. Some things you just sit with. I moved out of the house we'd shared and into a smaller place in East Nashville, closer to the office. The first few months were the strangest, not because I was devastated, but because I kept catching myself waiting for something to be wrong and finding that nothing was. No mileage that didn't add up. No pauses before a smile. No feeling in the back of my chest that I was missing something I hadn't been shown yet. Just a quiet house and a functioning company, and the particular kind of clarity that only comes after something has been completely taken apart and survived. There's a question people ask when they find out what happened. They want to know if I saw any of it coming. And the honest answer is that I saw the edges of it, the mileage, the evenings that didn't match the stories, but I didn't see the inside of it. I didn't see the conversations my wife had with her father about the structure of my business. I didn't see the specific moment she decided that what we'd built together was worth less than what she could extract from it. I didn't see my business partner sitting in a lawyer's office being offered a buyout funded by money that was supposed to be mine. I didn't see it because I wasn't looking for it. And I wasn't looking for it because I was too busy trusting the people who were supposed to deserve it. People want that to be the part I'm bitter about. The blindness, the trust. They want me to say I should have been more suspicious, more guarded, more the kind of man who checks instead of assumes. But I'm not bitter about it. I trusted my wife because I loved her completely. I trusted my business partner because we'd built something real together. Those weren't mistakes in judgment. They were the natural behavior of a person who wasn't running a scheme and therefore didn't spend his time imagining that other people were. The mistake wasn't trusting. The mistake was waiting too long once I felt something was wrong. I put the tracker on the car the same week the mileage stopped making sense. I called my attorney the same night I found the Delaware LLC. I didn't wait for a confrontation that would have warned them and given them time to move assets. I didn't give anyone the opportunity to explain it away with a better lie. I just gathered what I had, moved quietly, and let the structure of what they'd built collapse under its own weight when the right people started pulling on the right threads. Some nights I drive past the Meridian Avenue building on my way home from the office. I don't stop. I don't slow down. It's just a building now, a converted loft with 12 units and a parking lot, the same as any other building on any other street. The thing that made it significant only had power as long as I didn't know about it. Once I knew, it just became a location. Somewhere something happened. Somewhere I drove past once at 8 p.m. and saw a silver Audi and understood that the most expensive education of my life had already begun, and I hadn't been informed of the enrollment. I graduated anyway. Didn't choose the school. But I kept what I learned.